Hello everyone and welcome to the next lesson on District 9, and we're going to be looking at District 9 as an allegory. So the first thing I want you to do is get down the definition of an allegory, which is just underneath the LO. Okay, pause the video to do that. Okay, so an allegory is a story in which a hidden meaning or moral message can be gained. You've seen these all over the place, but I'm going to give you some examples just so you can have a think then. So let's have a look at 1984 in the top right hand corner. So we had 1984 is a story written well before 1984 about what the writer thought was going to happen by the time that date rolled around, which was supposed to be teaching people that if we keep cracking down on privacy and free speech, this is what society is going to look like. If we look at a film like Spirited Away in the top left hand corner, it's an allegory for getting older and changing and becoming an adult, and so it's about the loss of childhood innocence. That's the allegory there. You have Us in the bottom left hand corner, which is about the treatment of black people and how they are treated in American society. You have Dark Phoenix, or all of the X-Men films, which are all allegories for originally it was for the LGBTQ community. So the X-Men were supposed to represent how LGBT people could be considered outsiders or different, and how poorly they were treated, and yet there was something special about them. The Night of Living Dead is a story about zombies attacking a house. Now you notice in the bottom left-hand corner of that poster, you have a black man with a bat. Now he is the final survivor of the film, so it's supposed to represent the mindless zombies, the racists in the American society, and how they kind of mindlessly come after black people unnecessarily. Now, as the films went on, so you got Night of the Living Dead and then Dawn of the Dead. In Dawn of the Dead, set in a in a mall. That film is supposed to be an allegory for consumerism and how people are obsessed with objects rather than real life things. And then The Matrix is something that we're going to come on to, but most people see The Matrix as an allegory for Christ, Jesus Christ being the one, being the chosen one, etc., which is what the main film's about. So we're going to look at The Matrix in more detail then. So in The Matrix, most people see him as like a Jesus type character where he's the one sent from God, he's special, and everyone treats him like that. However, you've actually also got the subtext of being trans. Now, the two Wachowski brothers, now both sisters, are trans people, and the film could be seen as an allegory for their life and how they felt excluded from society. Now, what I really recommend you see is this YouTube video by a YouTube channel called Now You See It, which is The Matrix, a different perspective. I do recommend you pause the video and go watch that as an allegory. It is an amazing experience of seeing a film in a completely new light. I had no idea this was an allegory for like trans issues and how the directors and writers felt about being trans. It's really interesting. All I ever saw it was an allegory for Jesus being the one, etc., and being sent by God. But this video shines a new light on how it's seen, and it's told through this perspective of the writers talking about their transition as well. It's really interesting. I recommend you pause the video and go and watch it. Okay. All right, let's move on. Now then, District 9. District 9 is almost obvious in its allegorical meaning. So you've got a separation between the aliens and the rest of South African society, which is a clear reference to apartheid. Now, we are going to go over some of the apartheid context just in case you've forgotten. But what you may remember is that black people and white people separated, despite the fact that black people were in the majority. Okay, and because of that treatment, they suffered poor conditions and poor housing, etc. Okay, and living in poverty. Okay, so let's have a look at some of that context then, just in case you forgot. We'll come back to how it's an allegory in a minute. All right, so the timeline then. 1948 to 56, the government tried hard to take away votes from blacks. 1956, blacks could vote for 4 MPs out of several more than that. 1969, law prohibited voting altogether for black people. And then it took until 1990 to 1993 for apartheid to truly end after negotiations for a free and universal universal election. In 1994, the first in South Africa with the universal voting. So it took up until only 25 years ago, 26 years ago now, for it to change. Okay, next. So the Sharpeville Massacre, then this is the painting representing it. So the Sharpeville Massacre in 1959, a group formed the PAC, which organised a demonstration against passbooks on 21st of March 1960. One of those protests was held in the township of Sharpeville, where 69 people were shot and killed by police in the massacre. Now, these passbooks, you might think, well, why are they fighting over an ID card? It's because it's something they had to purchase, and it was the main focus was stopping black people in the street to ask them, well, where is your ID card? And finding new ways to punish them when actually they couldn't afford to get these passbooks or didn't feel that they were necessary. It was almost like a cost of simply existing is how they saw it. Now, the resettlement then, so during the 1960s, 70s and early 80s, the government implemented a policy of resettlement to force people to move to their designated group areas. So where they were living were suddenly designated as white areas, and they had to move from their already poverty-stricken conditions into worse conditions often. Now, millions of people were forced to relocate. These removals included people relocated due to slum clearance programs. So they saw them as removing them from slums when actually all they were doing was moving them to a different place. They didn't have to actually look at them. The best publicised forced removals of the 1950s occurred in Johannesburg, the capital, when 60,000 people were moved to the new township of Soweto, an abbreviation of the Southern Western Townships. So 60,000 people were moved in Johannesburg because the white people saw them as a threat to their society, so they moved them away. Now, these are the sorts of conditions, and you can see how similar it is to District 9. And in fact, they filmed it in the District 9 locations. I think we covered that in another lesson. So District 9 is a perfect embodiment of this representation of the squalor that black people lived in. They were removed from the slums that the laws had forced them into. So because of the laws that the white people had put into place, they went into these conditions, and then the white people went further to move them from these as well. All right, so let's look at how characters represent their real life counterparts then. So we're going to look at how District 9 is an allegory. We're going to focus firstly on the characters. So Christopher then is the activist. He's the person fighting to change things in South Africa. Okay, so he could be seen as the Martin Luther King of that society, even though he lived in America. He could be seen as the Malcolm X, but most likely he's supposed to be someone in the same vein as Nelson Mandela. Now, Nelson Mandela, if you want to look him up, was one of the people that fought for the change to the laws in South Africa, and him being, I think, the first, South African president represents that change and that shift, and Christopher represents that in the film. He represents people trying to make a change, trying to make things different, trying to make things better for his people. Okay, that's Christopher. So I wanted to pause the video and make notes on how Christopher is seen as an activist and who he could represent in the real world. Pause the video and do that. Okay, let's look at the next one then. So Peter Smith is the racist ruler. So he is the white elite in South Africa. Now, you may not know these people, but he could represent these two leaders, Srisdom and Malam. Now, Malam was the first of the two, was the former, and he brought in the laws that prohibited black people doing certain things, particularly with voting. And then Srisdom also did the same thing, making sure that black people couldn't have the same rights as white people. Now, you might be able to see a little bit of a difference or similarity between Peter Smith and Malam there, but I think that's accidental. So he represents the racist ruler making the decisions for black people. Okay, so pause the video and tell me how Peter Smith represents the racist rulers of South Africa. Next then, so Vickers is the changing attitudes. Now, there isn't really like specific people he represents, but at the beginning of the film, he represents the South African casual white person just doing his job and really seeing negative sides of the culture as he saw it. Now, he was treated the prawns incredibly negatively, incredibly aggressively and horribly and patronising at the beginning of the film, and then by the end of the film he understands their situation, just like the South African society. So it took South African society until the 90s in order to truly change their attitudes towards black people, to give them the rights that they so desperately wanted and deserved. So tell me how Vickers is the changing attitude, how he represents that. Okay, pause the video to tell me how he represents that. Alright, so what I want you to do now then, with your copy of District 9, I'd like you to re-watch the eviction scenes. It lasts about 10 minutes from early on in the film. I want you to re-watch the eviction scenes. You might want to watch them a couple of times because we're going to be focusing on key parts of it and how Vickers treats them on the prawns and how that represents the black people and how they're treated in their society in the up into the 90s. Okay, so pause the video to go re-watch that scene. All right, let's go then. So let's look at how the scene is allegorical then. So how it represents the wider society in South Africa. So, firstly then, we have the position of power that Vickers is put into. Okay, so I want you to make notes as we do this. So tell me how this scene represents South African society, how it is an allegory. So we have Vickers' treatment of Christopher, the way he talks down to him, the way the camera is tilted up at him to give him a position of power, and how he questions Christopher with no remorse and no guilt or no shame, how he's willing to treat his son and how he's willing to treat him specifically by getting him to put on his knees. So he comes in, there's the gun on screen there because they see him as a threat, even though he doesn't hold a weapon. Okay, so that's the first shot. So make sure you're making notes on the first one. And then the next one. So we have this patronising, judgmental. Like you can even see it in his body language how he's ready to talk down to the prawn. So he shows him his badge. He waves his badge in his face. The slum in the background there is showing the abject conditions that these prawns lived in, just like in South African society with the black people during apartheid. You had the backup on the left-hand side with the MNU officer, and on the right-hand side you have the trainee who doesn't understand the morality of these conditions and just takes Vickers' word for it. So you can see how the white man stepping up to the prawn is supposed to be a representation of apartheid and how black people were treated. All right, that's the second one. So this third one then, we have the prawns biting into the tyre, showing how the white people are seeing them as these animalistic characters. This is the scene where Vickers throws in the cat food, and it shows almost the glee in his face, being able to treat these prawns this way and to look down at them in the way that he does. So in this sense, we can see how white people look down upon the prawns and see them as pathetic and weak creatures, and almost how backwards their society is, because that's just how the white people saw the black people in South Africa. In the fourth one, if you look at the subtitles here, you have the prawn not understanding the concept of eviction. So what the white people are doing in this scene and how they treat the black people in real life with the apartheid was that they manipulated the black people and then manipulate the prawns by making the most of their lack of education. Because they're not educated, they can't defend themselves. They can't fight back against what's happening to them, just like the black people who were moved out of the slums in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. Just like that, they can't fight back. They can't change that situation that they've been put into by the white people. Okay, so what I've put in front of you here then is a question. How does Blomkamp use District 9 as an analogy for apartheid then? I've given you an example analysis then. Blomkamp uses Vickers' condescension and patronising tone in order to show District 9 as an analogy for apartheid. We see the mid-shot of Vickers as he speaks to the prawns. The setting is used by the director to represent the squalor they are living in, and the tone of voice the actor makes shows the power dynamic between them. Audience members would easily would easily see the connection between the apartheid of South Africa and how these aliens are being treated. Therefore, the director is using this treatment by Vickers to represent how important it is that we do not return to segregation in South Africa. So this modern analysis is looking at how District 9 is being used as an analogy for apartheid. And what I'd like you to do is look at these screenshots that I've put in front of you and analyse how they are allegorical, how they represent apartheid. Okay, so I'm going to leave on that model analysis, and what I'd like you to do is either look at the poor education, the manipulation of the poor, or the treatment of the more intelligent, like Christopher. So tell me how this eviction scene is allegorically related to those features. Okay, I recommend you spend about 10 to 15 minutes explaining how this scene is an allegory for the real world in apartheid South Africa. So pause the video to do that, 10 to 15 minutes. Okay, then next, let's move on. So this is where it gets a little bit riskier then for the film, which some people have critiqued it for. Now, these are a little bit blurry, but in these two scenes, you can kind of see where the allegory stretches just a little bit too far. On the left-hand side, you have the abortion scene where Vickers forces himself into the homes of the prawns and sets fire to their babies. Now, the reason that's risky and the reason the allegory of South African apartheid doesn't quite fit into that is because this obviously never happened. The white people did not kill baby children of black people, and they also most definitely did not set fire to them. So this is brutal in terms of the film, but the issue with that is that it kind of takes it so extreme that there's a disconnect between what it's kind of taking the mick out of, what it is satirising and what it is being an allegory for, to taking it too far and almost becoming like grotesque and abhorrent now, or more abhorrent. So let's look at the right-hand side. Now, this is the scene where Christopher discovers that the white people, that the people in charge, that people at M&U have been dissecting and doing tests on his fellow prawns. Now, again, this never happened in the real world. Now, you could argue that it has happened in the past, for example, with Hitler and the Nazis, and I think it may have happened in Soviet Russia and other places. However, it most definitely did not happen in South African society. Black people were not scientifically tested on. Now, this scene almost takes the allegory too far, and it falls into the danger of ruining the message that they initially set up. Now, the reason I'll bring this up is because there's a recent TV show on Amazon called Hunters, and this is about Nazi hunters after World War II, where Americans go and look for Nazis that survived World War II and kill them. Now, it come under fire recently. I think it's a 2020 TV show. Now, it came under fire recently because there's this scene in it, as you can see on this right-hand side, where the soldiers at the concentration camp place the Jews in a chess game, and they force them to go across the board and kill each other. Now, the issue with that, obviously there's an obvious issue with that, which is that it's unrealistic and it didn't happen. Now, obviously, no one can defend the Nazis. No one can defend the Holocaust. However, the issue with this scene is that because it never happened, there's the risk that some people may think, well, if that didn't happen, then maybe the Holocaust didn't happen. Maybe Jews weren't actually treated that horribly. So there's an issue with Holocaust denial where if you exaggerate to such an extreme extent, then people are going to miss the real atrocities and the things that really happened. Now, if you exaggerate in this way, just like they're doing District 9, then people might think, well, if that didn't happen, then maybe the other things that are represented didn't happen also. Maybe Jews weren't killed, or maybe black people weren't segregated, if that makes sense. So there is an issue with this film and taking the satire, taking the allegory too far, and therefore leading people astray, leading them into a situation where they'll be thinking, well, that didn't happen to black people, therefore perhaps the other stuff didn't. Perhaps I shouldn't trust this film and how it represents this allegory of apartheid. Just like in the TV show, maybe we can't actually trust what actually happened to the Jews in the Holocaust. So it's just one example of how this film has a little bit of an issue then. So if this never happened, then will people believe that it did? So there's also a sense that, well, oh my God, what if this actually happened to the black people in this society and we need to go fight it, we need to go challenge it when it actually didn't? So you've also got people going the other way, just like a chess game, what people thinking, oh my God, these Nazis actually did this. And taking that information and passing it on to other people is risky, is dangerous, as the film appears to be doing. So this is a criticism of the troubling analogy then. You might want to pause it to read it yourself, I don't mind. The city in question is the director's hometown of Johannesburg, South Africa, a location that simultaneously enables and renders very self-conscious the movie's satirical dimension. So basically what he's saying that because it's a real location, it's a little bit confusing because it's real and because apartheid really happened there, it's odd and it creates a bit of confusion. Only a few years after apartheid was abolished in South Africa, well, there they go, you see, bringing it all over again, criminalising and dehumanising the entire populace with a Soweto-like township and petty discrimination in public parks, restaurants, everything. But just as no one in EastEnders watches EastEnders, no one notices the apartheid parallel here. So what this kind of the issue that this person in The Guardian writing this is bringing up then is that because apartheid has actually happened in this world and there are actual slums in this location, then it seems odd that you'd have an additional layer of segregation. So black people just had everything solved, relatively solved recently, and now you're getting the aliens treated the same way, and there's no self-awareness there. So to summarise then, it's kind of meaning that it's difficult to use the real location of apartheid as the location for an analogy of it. So if you look at these examples then, so you've got X-Men, you've got 1984, you've got Avatar, you've got Minority Report, you've got The Matrix, you've got Arrival, Blade Runner 2049 and E.T., all of which I recommend, by the way. These are all allegories in their own sense. Now, Avatar is supposed to be representing how people brutalised African society and treated them horrendously and treated them as non-human. Minority Report is a comment on the future of free speech and being able to predict the future. In Arrival, it's supposed to be about the coming together of people. Now, the thing about all of these films is that they all take place in either fictional locations or nondescript locations where it doesn't really matter where the location is. Blade Runner 2049 is a distant world where we kind of live in like a pseudo Chinese world where there's a mixture of languages and the way the world works is very similar. Now, because these locations in these films are so different to ours, there's no confusion like we get in District 9, or there's no confusion like we do in that TV show Hunters. So it kind of all fits together really nicely because it's distant from ours. Avatar, if Avatar was put, imagine the aliens from Avatar landing in Africa and then suddenly the humans have to go and subjugate them and segregate them and treat them horribly. There would be a complete mass confusion about how this film works because Africa has already had that done to it as a continent. So if you do that again through the film Avatar, then it confuses it. But so having it at a distance, that's the beauty of sci-fi. Sci-fi can allegorically represent the past, by showing it in the future and by teaching lessons about the past by showing us the future, if that makes sense. Now, if you confuse it like District 9 is, then you lead into risky territory of leading the audience down a path they might not necessarily need to go down. So the only example where this does kind of work is in Godzilla. Now, Godzilla is supposed to be an allegory for World War II and the bomb that hit the two nuclear weapons that hit Japan, Hiroshima and Fukushima. So no, sorry, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Now, because of these two nuclear bombs that went off, the people had to grow. They had to come together to fight against this destruction. Now, Godzilla takes place in Japan. Now, where the bombs actually take place. So this is the only one that kind of works, that kind of fits into the same world as where it is based, just like District 9. But it kind of works in Godzilla because it is such an extreme example that's been allegorically used. So that's one example of it using well. Now, all the others, as I said, distance themselves from what they're trying to show, and District 9 doesn't do a good enough job of doing that because it's set in South Africa, and Hunters doesn't do a very good job of that because it makes the situation in Concentrate so extreme, people might misread or misthink about the past. So what I'd like you to do then is summarise all of the issues that I've just been describing with how the analogy may not work in District 9. So things I want you to include. Other films that have analogies, you may need to research some of the films that I've listed because you may not have heard of them. I do recommend you watch all of the ones listed though, and all of the ones that I've talked about in this lesson. So tell me how the film's analogy is successful but also problematic, and tell me how you would resolve these issues with the double S there. They shouldn't have included that. Issues. So tell me how you would resolve this issue of making an allegory. Would you take these scenes out of it? Would you add in different scenes? Would you show things linked to perhaps the Sharpeville massacre, etc.? So what I'd like you to do then is I'd like you to summarise the issues with this film not properly allegorising the past, allegorising apartheid. Okay, pause the video. That might take about 10-15 minutes. Okay, let's pause the video to do that, and I'll move on. Okay, so this is so the final thing I wanted to look at is a real district. Now, District 9 is obviously a really cool sounding film name, but there is actually a place in South Africa that had all the districts. Now, this is District 6, so this is a real location, and there's a really famous poem written about it. You may have read it, so I'm going to show you the poem. Okay, Nothing's Changed by Tatamkulu, Africa. District 6. No board says it is, but my feet know, and my hands, and the skin about my bones, and the soft labouring of my lungs, and the hot, white, inwards turning anger of my eyes. Brash with glass, name flaring like a flag, it squats in the grass and weeds, incipient Port Jackson trees, new upmarket hawk cuisine, guard at the gatepost, a whites only inn. No sign says it is, but we know where we belong. I press my nose to the clear panes, know before I see them there will be crushed ice white glass, linen falls, the single rose. Down the road, working man's cafe sells bunny chows, take it with you, eat it at a plastic table's top. Wipe your fingers on your jeans, spit a little on the floor, it's in the bone. I'm back from the glass, boy again, leaving small mean O of small mean mouth. Hands burn for a stone, a bomb, to shiver down the glass. Nothing's changed. So this poem by Africa, that's his surname. So this is looking at how black people were treated even after apartheid kind of settled down. Now, District 6 is where this is set. Now, you'll notice that there's a mention of hawk cuisine and a new upmarket place, and it's a gatepost and a whites only inn. So people are being treated terribly by the white culture. So in South Africa, this is how they were treated, and they were separated from them. So apartheid is still pretty bad when this poem is set, and when it was written, it hasn't quite got to the 1990s level. But things were supposed to have gotten better, but they haven't. And you can kind of see the anger and the frustration in this poem, where he speaks of his hands burning for a stone or a bomb. And you can see he talks about his bones and his skin and labouring of his lungs, the hot white inwards turning anger of my eyes. So these quotations represent the anger that black people felt during their subjugation, during their segregation from white people up until the 1990s. Now, what I'd like you to do then as a final task is tell me, is this poem a better representation of apartheid than District 9? So does this do a better job at representing apartheid than District 9, and why? And perhaps to extend yourself a little bit, you can explain, well, does it matter? District 9 is a pretty good film. It's got good action. It's a well structured story. A lot the documentary style's effective. But is this film a good representation of apartheid, and why? That's the final activity. Okay, and that's it. Thank you, guys.